Chapter 1. The Bargain Sealed. Valerian Duskbane stood before the towering gilded mirror, his reflection foreign to him. The heavy silk gown, embroidered with silver threads, clung uncomfortably to his frame. The cascading veil draped over his shoulders, the delicate lace framing his sharp features. He had never felt so humiliated, so utterly powerless. His sister should have been standing here, but she had run, vanished into the night, leaving behind only a hurried letter of apology. And now, to prevent war from breaking out once more, it was Valerian who would be wed in her place. The law does not specify that a bride must be female, his father had said, his voice cold and final. You will do your duty. Duty. The word burned like a brand against his chest. He clenched his fists at his sides, glaring at his own reflection. His fate had been decided for him. He would marry Theorin Lysander, Crown Prince of Eldoria, a man he had never met, a man who would soon be his husband. The doors to his chamber opened. It is time, a voice announced. His heart pounded violently, but he lifted his chin. He was a Duskbane. He would not break. The grand hall of the Eldorian palace was a vision of opulence. Golden chandeliers, intricate marble floors, and rows upon rows of nobility dressed in their finest. Yet all Valerian could focus on was the man standing at the altar. Theorin Lysander was a presence that could not be ignored. Tall and broad-shouldered, clad in ceremonial armor, with a regal blue sash, he carried himself with an ease that spoke of both power and confidence. His dark hair was neatly combed back, accentuating his striking features. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, and piercing golden eyes that seemed to look straight through him. Theorin's gaze locked onto Valerian's as he approached, and something shifted in them, a flicker of curiosity, interest, and something deeper, something Valerian refused to acknowledge. The ceremony passed in a haze. Words were spoken, vows exchanged. Theorin's voice was steady, unwavering as he pledged himself to Valerian. When it was Valerian's turn, his voice did not falter, but it was laced with defiance. A hand, warm and steady, took his own. Theorin's grip was firm yet careful, as if handling something fragile. You may kiss your bride, the officiant declared. Valerian barely had time to react before Theorin leaned in. It was a chaste kiss, brief and respectful, but the weight of it sent a shock through Valerian's entire being. The crowd erupted in applause. Theorin stepped back slightly, his lips barely parted as he regarded his new husband. Then, with an unreadable smile, he whispered just for Valerian to hear, You are quite fetching, my prince. Valerian's breath caught. His face burned, not from pleasure, but from anger. This was only the beginning. Chapter 2. The Wedding Night. The walk to the royal chambers was long and silent. Valerian's heart pounded with every step, his dread growing heavier. He had survived the wedding ceremony, but now he faced something far worse, the wedding night. He kept his gaze forward, refusing to look at Theorin. The prince walked beside him with an easy grace, his hands clasped behind his back, as though this were nothing more than a casual stroll. When they reached their chambers, the heavy wooden doors swung open, revealing a room far too grand for comfort. A massive bed, draped in silk and embroidered with Eldorian symbols, dominated the space. The air was thick with the scent of burning candles and fresh flowers, meant to set a romantic mood, but to Valerian it felt suffocating. His fists clenched at his sides as he turned to face his husband. Let's get this over with, he snapped. Theorin arched a brow, amusement flickering in his golden eyes. Get what over with? Valerian swallowed hard. The consummation, he forced out, hating how his voice trembled. A long silence stretched between them before Theorin let out a soft chuckle. Did you think I would force you? Valerian stiffened. That is what marriage means, isn't it? Theorin stepped closer, his presence both commanding and oddly reassuring. Marriage means many things, Valerian. But in Eldoria, it does not mean taking something that is not freely given. His voice was calm, steady. I will not touch you unless you want me to. Valerian's breath hitched. He wasn't sure what response he had expected, but it wasn't this. He wanted to feel relief, but instead he felt something more dangerous, uncertainty. Theorin reached for the heavy veil still covering part of Valerian's face and lifted it gently. His touch was careful, almost reverent, as if peeling away layers of armor rather than mere fabric. When their eyes met, Valerian saw something he didn't understand. Not lust, not amusement, just patience. I will sleep on the couch, Theron said finally, turning away as though the matter were settled. Valerian blinked. What? Theron glanced at the grand sofa by the fireplace. It looks comfortable enough. Valerian stared, at a loss for words. No mocking remarks, no cruel demands, just simple acceptance. Before he could stop himself, he blurted out, "You're a prince. Why should you be the one to—" Theron smiled, but there was something knowing in it. "You are my husband, Valerian, not my prisoner." With that, Theron removed his outer sash, unfastened his armor, and made his way to the couch as if this arrangement was perfectly natural. Valerian stood frozen, his mind a whirlwind of confusion. He had expected a monster, a brute who would take what he wanted without care. Instead, he had been given a husband who knew. He shook his head. He would not fall into this illusion of kindness. He climbed into bed, pulling the covers tightly around him, determined to ignore the warmth of Theron's presence across the room. But as the night stretched on, his thoughts betrayed him. Perhaps, just perhaps, this marriage would not be the nightmare he had feared. Chapter 3. A Prince, a Husband. The morning after the wedding, Valerian expected tension, awkwardness, a demand for him to act as a proper spouse. But instead, Theron had simply greeted him with a casual nod before heading off to his royal duties. No pressure, no expectations. At first, Valerian thought it was an act, some calculated display of patience to lull him into a false sense of security. But as the days passed, Theron never once tried to control him. He didn't force Valerian to share his bed. He didn't dictate his movements. In fact, the prince was surprisingly considerate. Whenever Valerian spoke, Theron listened, not out of obligation, but with genuine interest. When they dined together, Theron made sure Valerian's favorite dishes were served, despite Valerian never mentioning what he liked. He even placed a thick fur cloak over Valerian's shoulders on a particularly cold evening, with a simple "you were shivering." These small gestures confused Valerian more than outright demands ever could. Yet, while Theron's kindness made him uneasy, the Eldorian court was far less forgiving. The first confrontation came during an afternoon tea with the noblewomen and advisors. Valerian, still adjusting to his new life, had been invited, though he quickly realized it wasn't a mere courtesy. Your Highness, Lady Corvina, a high-ranking court official, addressed him with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. We have noticed you are reluctant to take on the expected duties of a royal consort. Valerian stiffened. What do you mean? Another woman, the Duchess of Vere, sipped her tea before replying. The people need to see a united royal couple. It would reassure them to see you embrace your role as the prince's spouse. You must attend public events more frequently, Lady Corvina added, and learn the traditional duties of a royal wife. Valerian clenched his jaw. I am not a wife. A tense silence followed. The Duchess gave him a condescending smile. No, of course not, Your Highness, but you are the prince's spouse, and the people expect you to— I expect nothing of him. The deep voice sent a shiver down Valerian's spine. Theron had entered the room, his expression unreadable. The nobles immediately stood, bowing as he approached. He placed a hand on the back of Valerian's chair, a silent but unmistakable gesture of support. His golden eyes scanned the gathered women, cold and sharp. My husband is still adjusting, Theron said smoothly. He will take on whatever role he sees fit. No one will force him into something he does not wish to be. The nobles exchanged uneasy glances, clearly uncomfortable with the prince's unwavering defense of Valerian. Lady Corvina hesitated. Of course, Your Highness. We only meant to offer guidance. Guidance is appreciated, Theron said, his tone deceptively mild. But pressure is not. That ended the discussion. Later that evening, Valerian found himself staring at Theron as they dined alone. You didn't have to do that, he said, pushing his food around his plate. Theron raised a brow. Defend you? Valerian nodded. I could have handled them myself. Theron smirked. Oh, I have no doubt. But it is my responsibility to ensure no one mistreats you. Valerian swallowed, unsettled by how easily Theron spoke such words. Why? For the first time, Theron looked slightly taken aback. He set down his goblet, studying Valerian with an expression almost tender. Because you are my husband, Theron said simply. And I care for you. Valerian's heart stuttered. He looked away, confused and flustered. He had spent so long believing this marriage would be his downfall, but with every passing day, Theron made him question everything. And that terrified him more than anything else. Chapter 4. The First Sparks. Valerian had spent his entire life believing that love, especially love between two men, was unnatural, wrong, a weakness. Yet every day in Eldoria, Theron shattered that belief. It was in the way he always made sure Valerian ate, despite his protests. The way he guided him through the treacherous waters of court politics with unwavering patience. The way his golden eyes softened whenever they spoke in private, as if Valerian was the only person who truly mattered. It was infuriating. And worse, Valerian was beginning to notice it. The tension between them came to a head one evening when Valerian found himself alone in the royal gardens. He had come here seeking quiet, an escape from the ever-watchful eyes of the court, but his peace was short-lived. "Penny for your thoughts?" Valerian turned to see Theron approaching, his posture relaxed, yet his presence undeniable. He always carried himself with effortless confidence, but around Valerian, he moved with an almost unconscious gentleness. Valerian sighed, looking away. "Just thinking about how much simpler my life was before this marriage." Theron chuckled, settling beside him on the stone bench. "I imagine it was." They sat in silence for a moment before Theron spoke again. "Is it so terrible being my husband?" Valerian hesitated. The answer should have been simple, yes. That's what he had told himself from the beginning, but the truth was far more complicated. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Theron studied him for a long moment before speaking. "What are you afraid of, Valerian?" Valerian flinched at how easily Theron saw through him. His whole life he had been taught to believe that wanting a man was a sin, an abomination, and yet, here was Theron, strong, noble, and kind, showing him nothing but patience and affection. And Valerian was starting to want it. That terrified him. Valerian swallowed hard, forcing himself to meet Theron's gaze. "I don't know how to be your husband." Theron's expression softened. "Then don't force it. Let it happen naturally." Valerian's breath caught. Theron said it so easily, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. Before he could reply, a voice interrupted them. "Apologies, your highnesses." A royal guard bowed deeply. "There is an urgent matter." Theron rose instantly, his expression shifting to that of a warrior. "What is it?" The guard hesitated. "There has been an assassination attempt on King Lysander." Valerian's blood ran cold. Without another word, Theron turned to him, his hands briefly resting on Valerian's shoulders. "Stay here. Stay safe." Then he was gone, his cloak billowing behind him as he strode toward danger without hesitation. Valerian clenched his fists, his heart pounding. Theron had always been a war god, a man who had lived his life on the battlefield. But for the first time, Valerian felt something deep and sharp in his chest. Fear. Not for himself, but for Theron. And that realization shook him to his core. Chapter 5. A Love Worth Fighting For. Theron returned late that night, blood staining his sleeves. Not his own, thankfully. His father, King Lysander, had survived the attempt on his life, and the traitor had been swiftly dealt with. Valerian had waited in their chambers, pacing restlessly. He had told himself it was only natural to be concerned. Theron was his husband, and if he died, Valerian's position in Eldoria would become even more uncertain. But deep down, he knew the truth. He hadn't just been worried, he had been terrified. When the doors finally opened and Theron stepped inside, Valerian didn't hesitate. He rushed forward, gripping Theron's arms, his eyes scanning him for wounds. "You're not hurt," he demanded. Theron blinked, startled by the sudden contact. Then amusement flickered in his golden eyes. "Were you worried about me, husband?" Valerian scowled, stepping back as if burned. "You're insufferable." Theron only chuckled, removing his cloak and tossing it onto a chair. The assassin was a desperate fool. It was handled. Valerian should have left it at that, should have let Theron bathe and rest. But instead the words tumbled out before he could stop them. "And if it hadn't been handled? If you had been killed?" Theron turned to him, expression unreadable. "Then I would have died knowing I protected my family." Valerian clenched his fists. "You don't have to throw yourself into danger every time." Theron smiled, stepping closer. It is my duty. Valerian looked away, his emotions a tangled mess. He had spent so long resenting this marriage, but tonight, the thought of losing Theron had made something shift inside him. Something terrifying. I should change, Theron said, breaking the silence. I must rejoin my father in the morning. Valerian exhaled shakily and turned away, ready to retreat to his side of the chambers. But then Theron's voice stopped him. Valerian. He turned back only to find Theron watching him with something unreadable in his gaze. I'm glad you worried for me. Valerian's heart stuttered. Theron smiled, softer this time. Then, as if sensing Valerian couldn't handle any more tonight, he turned and disappeared into the bathing chamber. Valerian stared at the empty doorway, his pulse still racing. He was falling for his husband. And there was no denying it anymore. Chapter 6. A Love Sealed in Fire. Days passed since the assassination attempt, but the fear that had gripped Valerian that night refused to fade. He had spent so long resisting this marriage, convincing himself that love was impossible between them. But now the truth was undeniable. He had fallen for his husband. The realization burned within him, terrifying and exhilarating all at once. He had been raised to believe love between men was unnatural. But what could be unnatural about the way his heart raced whenever Theron entered a room? About the warmth that spread through him whenever Theron smiled at him? No, this was not unnatural. This was love, and Valerian was done fighting it. That evening he found Theron standing on the palace balcony, staring out at the kingdom. The moonlight bathed him in silver, highlighting the sharp angles of his face. He looked strong, powerful, yet at ease, as if he belonged to the night itself. Valerian swallowed hard, then took a steadying breath. Theron. The prince turned, his golden eyes lighting up at the sight of him. Valerian. Valerian hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward, closing the distance between them. He reached for Theron's hand, threading their fingers together. It was the first time he had ever touched him willingly, and he felt Theron's sharp intake of breath. I love you. The words spilled from his lips, raw and unguarded. I don't know when it happened, but it did. And I was scared. Still am. But I can't keep pretending I don't want this. That I don't want you. Theron was silent for a long moment. Valerian's heart pounded, afraid he had been too late, afraid that Theron had grown tired of waiting. But then Theron's lips curled into a breathtaking smile. I fell for you at first sight. Valerian's eyes widened. You... What? Theron chuckled, lifting Valerian's hand to his lips and pressing a kiss to his knuckles. That night at the altar when you walked toward me in that ridiculous wedding gown. With fire in your eyes and defiance in your stance, I knew then that I wanted no one else. Valerian's breath caught. Then why didn't you say anything? Theron's smile softened. Because love cannot be forced, Valerian. I wanted you to choose me. Not because duty demanded it, but because your heart did. Valerian's chest ached at those words. How could this man, who had been raised in war and duty, still be capable of such unwavering patience, such devotion? His husband had loved him all along. Valerian reached up, cupping Theron's face in his hands. Then let me say this again, he whispered, his voice trembling. I love you, Theron Lysander. And I choose you, now and always. Theron exhaled sharply, as if hearing those words stole the breath from his lungs. Then, with a look of absolute reverence, he leaned in and kissed Valerian. It was nothing like their wedding kiss, nothing like the careful restraint Theron had always shown. This was fierce, consuming, a kiss that spoke of longing, of devotion, of a promise sealed in fire. When they finally pulled apart, Theron rested his forehead against Valerian's, his hands gripping his waist as if he never wanted to let go. I swear to you, Theron murmured, voice thick with emotion, I will love you and protect you for as long as I live. Valerian smiled, his heart full for the first time in his life. I believe you. And this time he truly did.